So let's get right into it. Right off the bat, the Israelites unanimously agree to the terms. They say, everything the Lord has said, we will do. This is huge because it establishes this text we're exploring as a legally binding contract, not just helpful guidelines. There's real mutual agreement happening here. The people heard the stipulations, and they are enthusiastically signing on the dotted line.
This treaty lays out these rapid-fire justice laws, demanding absolute fairness in lawsuits. It strictly prohibits spreading false reports, taking bribes, or even just going along with the crowd to do wrong. The whole point is that justice here has to be completely blind. You obviously can't favor the rich, but interestingly enough, you also can't show favoritism to the poor just because they're poor. It always has to come back to the truth. Plus, it commands the absolute protection of foreigners. And it does this using a really powerful appeal to empathy. It reminds the Israelites, hey, you shouldn't oppress outsiders, because you know exactly how it feels to be foreigners in Egypt.
And this brilliantly illustrates the unexpected depth of this document. We usually think of ancient laws as purely punitive. But look at this comparison. On the left, you've got what human nature expects you to do with an enemy, right? Ignore them, or maybe even wish them harm. But on the right, the treaty actually legally mandates active compassion. If your enemy's ox wanders off, you have to return it. If the donkey of someone who literally hates you collapses under a heavy load, you are legally bound to go help them lift it. That is a truly remarkable standard for community cohesion.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how the text elegantly mandates this rhythm of rest, built into the very fabric of society. Every seventh day is a mandated pause. And this isn't just for the landowners either. It explicitly includes slaves, foreigners, and even the working animals. And then it zooms way out to a macro level. Every seventh year, the entire agricultural cycle has to stop. The land is left completely unplowed, so the poor can forage from it, and whatever they leave behind goes to the wild animals. So it's actually an ancient framework for both social welfare and ecological recovery.
Alongside all that rest, it sets up a strict calendar. All men are required to appear before the sovereign Lord 3 times a year. And these aren't just random dates drawn out of a hat. There's specific agricultural and historical milestones. You've got the Festival of Unleavened Bread in the month of Aviv, commemorating their exodus. Then the Festival of Harvest, where they offer the first fruits of their crops. And finally, the Festival of Ingathering at the end of the agricultural year. It perfectly synchronizes the nation's spiritual life with the changing of the seasons.
Taking a closer look at these rituals, we find some highly specific stipulations. They're required to bring the absolute best of the firstfruits, but they are strictly forbidden from offering blood sacrifices with yeast. You also can't keep the fat of festival offerings until morning. And then there's this incredibly specific culinary rule. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Now, scholars have debated the exact reason for this for centuries. Maybe it was rejecting a specific Canaanite practice, but the main takeaway for our explainer today is just how meticulous and comprehensive this agreement is. It covers literally every detail of daily and religious life.
So, what do they get in return? Well, if they obey, listen carefully, and completely demolish the sacred stones of the foreign gods and the land they're entering, this incredible divine warranty kicks in. They're guaranteed a personal angelic escort to guard their path. God himself promises to be an enemy to their enemies, and on a personal, physical level, sickness will be removed. There will be no miscarriages or barrenness, and they are promised a full, complete lifespan. It is essentially a total guarantee of both national security and public health.
Let's see how this translates into their military strategy. Step 1, God promises to send terror and even hornets ahead of them to drive out the current inhabitants. But pay attention to steps 2 and 3. God explicitly promises a slow, gradual conquest, little by little. Why? Well, the text gives us this intensely practical logistical detail. If the land is cleared out all at once, before the Israelites actually have the population to fill it, the land would become desolate and wild animals would multiply and overrun them. It's a surprisingly pragmatic, operational plan embedded right inside a divine promise.
The contract then draws the exact geographical borders of their new territory. We're talking all the way from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, and from the desert out to the Euphrates River. But it comes with a massive warning. They must not make a covenant with the current inhabitants or their gods. If they let them stay and intermingle their worship, the text bluntly warns that those foreign gods will certainly become a snare to them. It's a hardline demand for absolute, uncompromised loyalty.
Opens early the next morning. Moses physically builds the ratification site right at the foot of Mount Sinai. He constructs an altar and sets up 12 massive stone pillars. These act as physical monuments representing every single faction of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he commissions young Israelite men to offer burnt offerings and sacrifice young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord.
Now you have to remember, to seal a covenant in the ancient Near East, a simple signature just wasn't enough. They required visceral rituals. Moses takes the blood from the sacrificed bulls. He puts half of it into bowls, and the other half he violently splashes directly against the newly built altar. So with the altar covered in blood, he takes the actual book of the covenant, the terms we literally just went over, and reads it aloud to the massive crowd. And once again, the people verbally agree. We will do everything the Lord has said, we will obey.
And then comes the ultimate act of ratification. Moses takes the remaining blood from those bowls and literally sprinkles it directly onto the people themselves. He declares, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." Think about that visual. The altar, representing God, is covered in blood. The people are covered in blood. This legal and spiritual contract is now officially, physically bound.
Immediately after this, we get a truly shocking moment in the text. The leadership, so Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of Israel's elders, they ascend the mountain, and the text boldly states that they saw the God of Israel. Now, in ancient theology, seeing God was thought to be instantly fatal. But here, the text explicitly points out that God did not raise his hand against them. Instead, in this beautiful gesture of profound peace and covenant fellowship, they sit down and effectively share a celebratory ratification meal right there in his presence.
The author leans into some absolutely stunning sensory language to describe this encounter. They don't actually describe God's face, but they describe what was right under his feet. They saw a surface resembling a pavement made of lapis lazuli, gleaming as brilliantly blue and clear as the sky itself. It's this gorgeous image meant to convey absolute majesty, clarity, and transcendent beauty.
But the ceremony isn't over for Moses. Leaving the elders behind to manage the camp, Moses and his aide Joshua continue further up Mount Sinai to receive the stone tablets. As he climbs, the narrative tension builds significantly. A thick cloud entirely covers the mountain, and for 6 whole days, Moses just waits outside it. It isn't until the 7th day that the Lord finally calls out to Moses from deep within the cloud.
The climax of this entire sequence is highly dramatic. To the Israelite public waiting nervously down below at the camp, the glory of the Lord didn't look like a bright blue pavement. To them, it looked like a terrifying, violent, consuming fire raging on the very top of the mountain. And right before their eyes, Moses steps directly into that cloud of fire. And then the text drops this number. Moses stayed up on that burning, cloud-covered mountain for exactly 40 days and 40 nights. Which leaves us with a massive cliffhanger to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Think about human nature for a second. The people just enthusiastically signed a strict, legally binding contract swearing absolute obedience to an invisible God. But now, their central leader has completely disappeared into a terrifying inferno for over a month with zero communication. What do you think happens to those impatient, anxious people waiting down at the bottom of the mountain? How long will they actually keep the promises they just made? It's a profound question of loyalty and human frailty, and it perfectly sets the stage for everything that comes next.
And the crucial point to understand is right here, in this specific instruction given to Moses. It wasn't just, hey, build me a nice tent when you get some free time. No, the text explicitly says, make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. This was absolutely not a random, ad hoc DIY project. It was an exact earthly replica of a divine design. Every single measurement, every material, every loop, every clasp, it was all meticulously specified. And look at this divine bill of materials. It's an absolute sensory explosion. We aren't just talking about grabbing some rocks and timber. We're looking at the gleam of gold, silver, and bronze. Imagine the visual pop of blue, purple, and scarlet yarns woven into fine, bright linen. Then you've got these rich, earthy textures, goat hair, red-dyed ram skins, and rugged acacia wood. Add in the scent of spices and olive oil for the light and fragrant incense, plus sparkling onyx and precious gems. I mean, it is incredibly lavish. What this brilliantly illustrates is the dual nature of this whole structure. On one hand, you've got this high-end luxury, pure gold, precious gems, finely twisted linen, which was all reserved for the sacred interior. But on the other hand, you have intense practical utility, like goat hair, red-dyed ram skins, and highly durable leather. The contrast is just perfectly functional. Think of it kind of like a luxury home wrapped in heavy-duty camping gear. The inside had to be this lavish sanctuary reflecting the divine, but the outside, that had to be a rugged, weatherproof shell that could actually survive a harsh desert environment. I want you to notice the sheer exactness of this number, 2.5.
The text obsesses over precise measurements. They didn't just wing it. The Ark of the Covenant was a chest made of acacia wood, overlaid inside and out with pure gold. It was exactly 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. It came complete with 4 gold rings and gold-overlaid carrying poles that were never, ever supposed to be removed. This precisely measured box was explicitly designed to carry the tablets of the covenant law.
But the visual drama really peaks when you look at the lid of this chest, known as the atonement cover. It wasn't made of wood at all. It was pure, solid, hammered gold. And on the ends of this cover sat 2 cherubim, hammered out of that exact same piece of gold. They faced each other, looking downward, with their wings spread upward to overshadow the cover. This wasn't just beautiful artwork, though. It was highly functional in a spiritual sense. That specific, shining space right between the cherubim's wings, that was the exact point where the divine presence would actually meet with the Israelites. It acted as the ultimate architectural focal point.
First up, we have the Table of the Presence. Similar to the Ark, it was built from acacia wood and overlaid entirely with pure gold. It featured a gold molding and a specialized rim exactly a handbreadth wide. It also had its own gold rings and poles for carrying. And what sat on it? Pure gold plates, dishes, and bowls. Just imagine the sheer weight and value of this one table. Its core purpose was to continually hold the bread of the presence before the divine, 24/7.
And that brings us to an absolute masterpiece of ancient metallurgy, the menorah. Notice the intricate botanical steps mapped out here. This wasn't cast in separate pieces and glued together. The base, the shaft, and the branches were all hammered from a single, massive piece of pure gold. 6 branches extended from the center, giving it 7 points of light. The details are just staggering, shaped like almond flowers, complete with individual buds and blossoms. The text even points out that exactly 1 talent of pure gold was used for this lampstand and its accessories. That is a massive amount of gold.
Check out the engineering behind how they made this gigantic structure portable. They obviously couldn't just weave one impossibly huge piece of fabric. Instead, they made sets of huge curtains. To connect them, they used this genius system. Exactly 50 loops of blue material on the edge of one curtain set, which perfectly aligned with 50 loops on the opposite set. Then, 50 gold clasps locked them all together. It's essentially an ancient flat-pack design. It allowed this massive tent to be quickly dismantled, moved, and then reassembled into a perfectly unified, cohesive structure.
And this tent definitely wasn't just a single flimsy sheet of fabric thrown over some poles. It was a highly engineered, multi-layered roof. Look at these 4 protective layers building from the inside out. The innermost ceiling was fine linen in blue, purple, and scarlet, featuring incredibly detailed cherubim woven directly into the fabric by a master artisan. Over that delicate art went a layer of 11 heavy goat hair curtains. Over the goat hair, ram skins dyed red. And finally, on the very top exterior, a covering of thick, durable leather. So you've got stunning, delicate interior artistry perfectly protected by serious, heavy-duty weatherproofing.
Here perfectly maps out the rectangular footprint of the tabernacle's walls. We are talking about massive upright frames made of acacia wood. You had 20 frames forming the south side, 20 for the north side, and 8 frames for the rear west end, which actually included specialized doubled corner frames just for extra stability. And these were not small sticks, guys. Each frame was 10 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. The sheer scale of this footprint is magnificent.
But here's a question. How do you keep heavy wooden walls standing upright in soft desert sand? Well, you engineer a solid foundation. At the bottom of every single wooden frame were 2 parallel projections, kind of like pegs. And slotted directly under each of those pegs were heavy silver bases. 2 silver bases per frame. That means 40 bases for the south, 40 for the north, and 16 for the west. We're talking nearly 100 heavy silver blocks used just to perfectly ground and level the entire structure. The engineering brilliance here is remarkable.
Now, to lock all these standing frames together securely, they used some really advanced crossbar engineering. For each side of the tabernacle, there were 5 crossbars made of acacia wood overlaid with gold. The wooden frames actually had gold rings attached specifically to hold these bars. But the real stroke of genius, that was the center crossbar. It didn't just span a few frames, it was engineered to shoot from end to end, right through the middle of the frames. This locked the entire wall into one incredibly stable, highly sophisticated yet still entirely portable unit.
So with the structure up, the interior space was precisely divided. It's so fascinating how the architecture itself physically dictated the varying levels of holiness and access.
You had the holy place, which was the larger outer room holding the table and the golden lampstand. But deeper inside was the most holy place, this exclusive, hyper-sacred chamber containing only one single item, the Ark of the Covenant and its gold atonement cover.
And what separated these two spaces wasn't a solid brick wall, it was the dividing veil. This was a masterfully embroidered curtain made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen, once again featuring those beautifully woven cherubim. It hung from gold hooks on 4 gold-overlaid acacia wood posts, standing on 4 silver bases. This veil was a breathtaking visual barrier. It created a tangible, physical boundary that protected the immediate presence of the divine, while simultaneously inviting deep reverence from anyone who saw it.
Which really leaves us with this final, fascinating thought. We've just seen the exactness of the measurements, the total genius of the modular flat-pack design, and the calculated use of both luxurious and rugged materials. So, how does architecture, whether we're talking about an ancient portable tent in the desert or a soaring modern cathedral, how does it shape our very experience of the sacred? The Tabernacle blueprint proves that the spaces we build are really never just physical shelters. They are profound reflections of what we value most.
Let's start our macro exploration with the outer perimeter, a space designed with sheer scale and rigorous structure in mind. To really understand this, you've got to picture the enormous physical footprint we're talking about here. The south side and the north side of the courtyard were each a staggering 100 cubits long, with the east and west ends measuring 50 cubits wide. And here's the crazy part. This massive perimeter wasn't built with solid brick or stone. It was enclosed entirely by curtains of finely twisted linen hanging 5 cubits high. All of this was held up by a super intricate system of bronze bases, posts, and silver hooks and bands. It created this vast, clearly defined space, cleanly separated from the harsh outside world by these brilliant linen boundaries. But the perimeter wasn't just plain linen all the way around. Right at the east end, facing the sunrise, was the entrance. And for this, the blueprints call for a stunning 20-cubit-long entrance curtain made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen, the work of an embroiderer. This is the very first time we see this striking color palette introduced. I want you to take a mental snapshot of those specific colors right now, because that sensory detail is going to echo throughout this entire blueprint. Inside that courtyard, we move inward to the absolute focal point of the space. Right at the center sat the altar of burnt offering. It was a square structure, 5 cubits by 5 cubits, featuring distinct horns on its 4 corners. But the texts make it very, very clear that this wasn't just some static monument to look at. The plans actually require an extensive toolkit made entirely out of bronze. We're talking pots to remove ashes, shovels, sprinkling bowls, meat forks, and fire pans. So what does this tell us? It means this area was a highly functional, kind of messy workspace, designed for intense, practical, and heavily physical daily use. And this brings us to the sheer ingenuity of the engineering here. I mean, think about it. How exactly do you build an altar that can withstand blazing fires, but can also be picked up and moved across a desert? Well, the blueprints dictate a hollow frame made of acacia wood, which is smart because it keeps it relatively lightweight, but then it's completely overlaid with durable bronze to handle all that extreme heat. They even designed a bronze network grating to sit halfway up the inside, and then inserted bronze overlaid poles into rings on the sides just so it could be carried. It is honestly the perfect marriage of portability and extreme. So now we're zooming in even further, leaving the architecture behind to focus on the human element, the priests operating within this space. The text specifically notes these garments were made for a distinct reason, to give them dignity and honor. Now, remember that mental snapshot I asked you to take at the courtyard entrance? The sacred garments, the ephod, the breastpiece, the waistband. They were all commanded to be made with gold and, quote, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen. That is the exact same color language used for the gateway woven directly into the clothing of the priest. Visually, the man and the sacred architecture are completely, seamlessly linked. He's practically a walking extension of the tabernacle itself. Let's take a closer look at a key piece of this wardrobe, the ephod. Now, what's really fascinating about this is the incredible symbolic weight the priest is carrying. On the 2 shoulder pieces of this garment, skilled workers were told to mount 2 onyx stones in gold filigree settings. A gem cutter was to engrave the names of the sons of Israel on these stones, 6 on one, 6 on the other. So Aaron, the high priest, literally carried the weight of the people on his shoulders as a memorial before the Lord every single time he served. Ephod was impressive. Wait until you see this next piece. It's the most intricate, visually stunning element of the entire wardrobe, and it was worn directly over the priest's heart. The breastpiece was basically a square pocket, folded double, woven out of gold and that same colored yarn we keep seeing. It was securely tied to the ephod with pure gold braided chains and a blue cord so it wouldn't swing around. But the real masterpiece, that's the gem work. Just look at the extreme precision here. 4 rows of precious stones, all meticulously mounted in gold filigree. From carnelian and lapis lazuli to amethyst and jasper. 12 stones in total, and every single unique stone was engraved like a seal with the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The craftsmanship is just astonishing. But here is the kicker. This dazzling breastpiece wasn't just high-end jewelry. It housed a deeply functional tool. Placed inside this folded square were the Urim and the Thummim. Now, the blueprints don't explicitly tell us what these actually looked like, but they definitely define their purpose. They were the means of making decisions for the Israelites. Because they were tucked inside this piece, Aaron always bore the means of divine judgment literally right over his heart whenever he entered the presence of the Lord. As we wrap up our visual tour with these outer layers, we see this brilliant engineering that merges pure visual beauty with literal life or death function. Underneath the ephod went a specific robe. On one hand, you have robust visual design. It was made entirely of blue cloth with a special woven edge around the head opening, designed specifically so that it wouldn't tear. So durability was absolutely key. But on the other hand, you have a very distinct auditory function. The hem of this robe was lined with alternating pomegranates made of colored yarn and actual ringing gold bells. So the crucial point here is exactly why those bells were there. The text is totally explicit about this. Aaron must wear this robe when he ministers so that the sound of the bells will be heard when he enters the holy place before the Lord and when he comes out, so that he will not die. Let that sink in. The stakes of entering the sacred space were absolute. These bells were a vital, life-saving acoustic signal of the priest's movements and his continued life as he worked entirely unseen in the holiest area of the courtyard. The final requirements of these ancient instructions just reinforce this overarching theme of absolute, unyielding purity. Aaron had to wear a pure gold plate on his turban, clearly engraved with the words "Holy to the Lord," basically bearing the guilt of sacred gifts so they'd be acceptable. Plus, there were super strict commands for unseen linen undergarments to cover their bodies, again, to prevent incurring guilt and death near the altar. And to eliminate all this sacred work happening inside the tent of meeting, the Israelites were commanded to bring clear oil of pressed olives to keep the lamps burning continuously from evening till morning. It was a lasting ordinance, an unblinking light right there in the sacred space. From those massive 100-cubit linen boundaries out in the sun, all the way down to the intricate gold filigree of a lapis lazuli stone over a beating heart, everything was profoundly connected. The architecture perfectly matched the garments. Every single material, every color, and every ringing bell served a deeply specific purpose. So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on. How does understanding this incredible unity of form, function, and symbolism change how we view ancient architectural and sartorial design? Because these definitely weren't just primitive tents. They were hyper-intentional, deeply layered blueprints where literally every single thread mattered. To really understand this ancient text, we have to look at some bizarrely specific items. I mean, think about it. A drop of blood on a toe, exactly half a shekel, precise measurements of cinnamon. These aren't just random throwaway details. They are critical tools for surviving an encounter with the divine. They are precise, completely non-negotiable components of this grand spiritual technology that was designed to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. And that brings us to the core concept of our text, consecration. Now, today, we might think of being holy or sacred as simply being, a morally good person. But in this ancient context, consecration isn't just about moral goodness at all. It is about the rigorous physical preparation required to interact with divine power. It means to be utterly separated, fundamentally altered, and entirely dedicated to a single, highly dangerous and magnificent purpose. Crucial point to remember here is that all these meticulous life-or-death steps we're about to review, they were designed strictly to make this extraordinary divine proximity possible. The text is crystal clear. The goal wasn't just doing a ritual for the sake of a ritual. The creator of the universe wanted to literally set up a tent and dwell right in the middle of the Israelite camp. But, as you can imagine, bringing that kind of unlimited power into a human neighborhood required some intense preparation. Think of these 4 strict, unbending steps as putting on an ancient spiritual hazard suit. First, they're washed with water at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So, a complete physical cleansing. Second, they get dressed in highly specific garments: a tunic, the robe of the ephod, which was the specialized ornate apron, and a breastpiece tied with a skillfully woven waistband. Third, a turban goes on the head, complete with a sacred emblem. And finally, they are anointed, with oil poured directly over their heads. Only after this intense physical transformation are they ready for the next phase. Okay, this is where modern readers often feel a bit of culture shock. In the ancient world, life, represented by blood, was the absolute ultimate currency for purity. And this breakdown brilliantly illustrates how each animal served a completely distinct mechanical function. A young bull acts as a sin offering. Its blood goes on the altar horns, but its body is burned entirely outside the camp. Then a ram for a burnt offering. Its blood gets splashed on the sides of the altar, and the whole thing is burned as a pleasing aroma. Finally, the ordination ram gets incredibly personal. Its blood is applied directly to the priests, and they actually eat the meat at the tent entrance. 3 animals, 3 totally different sets of rules. Let's zoom in on that ordination ram for a second. The text specifies taking its blood and applying it to the lobe of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot. Applying blood to these specific extremities was a powerful symbol. It marked the complete head-to-toe sanctification of the priest. It literally dedicated what they listen to, the work their hands do, and the path their feet walk entirely to the divine service. And get this, they couldn't just do this once, check a box, and call it a day. According to the text, this intense, highly specific ordination cycle of washing, dressing, anointing, and sacrificing those 3 animals had to be repeated perfectly for exactly 7 days. For a full week, day in and day out, they were steeped in this grueling, sensory-rich process just to ensure the altar and the priests were perfectly consecrated. The tent wasn't just some empty room. The text mandates exact construction details for the furniture. For instance, the Altar of Incense had to be a perfect square made of acacia wood and completely overlaid with pure gold. Top, sides, horns, the whole shebang. It even required gold rings and gold overlaid poles so human hands wouldn't directly touch it when it was moved. The bronze basin was similarly specific. Using high-value materials like pure gold and bronze clearly defined the boundary between the sacred space and the ordinary world outside. Now, why was that bronze basin so absolutely crucial? Well, look at this instruction right here. So that they will not die. The text literally says this twice. Whenever they enter the tent or approach the altar, they must wash. A single misstep, a momentary lapse in protocol, it meant death. The divine presence was magnificent, sure, but it was also incredibly volatile to anything impure. When a census was taken, a ransom for their lives was demanded. But look at how the text outlines this ransom. The rich are not to give more than a half shekel, and the poor are not to give less. Everyone gives exactly a half shekel. This is brilliant because, when it came to ransoming a life before the divine, socioeconomic status was entirely erased. A wealthy landowner and a struggling laborer, they held the exact same value. Their lives required the exact same atonement price. And to make sure there was absolutely no ambiguity or cheating the system, they standardized the currency. The half shekel had to be based on the sanctuary shekel, strictly defined as weighing 20 gerahs. By setting this standard base weight, the text ensures perfect mathematical equity among all Israelites aged 20 and older. You couldn't use a lighter weight if you were poor, or a heavier one to show off your wealth. It was rigid, objective equality. It demands a master perfumer to blend these highly specific ingredients to create the one unique sacred anointing oil. We're talking massive quantities. 500 shekels of liquid myrrh and cassia, 250 of cinnamon and calamus, all mixed into a hin of olive oil, which is roughly a gallon. This oil was used to anoint the tent, the ark, the altars, and the priests. The idea is, when you smelled this rich, complex aroma of cinnamon and myrrh, your brain immediately knew, without a doubt, that you were in the presence of the sacred. The incense burned inside the tent was just as meticulously controlled. Aaron had to burn it every single morning and every twilight. Made of gum resin, pure frankincense, and exotic resins, like onycha and galbanum, blended in strictly equal amounts. The text actually mandates that it must be kept salted, pure, and utterly unique. It was quite literally the atmospheric signature of God's dwelling place. But here is the catch. You couldn't just take this recipe home and make your tent smell nice. This chilling warning underscores why this matters so much. Replicating the scent for personal use resulted in total exile. You would be cut off from your people. The scent was a boundary just as real as a solid gold wall. hijacking the fragrance of the divine for your own enjoyment violated the very concept of consecration. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we've seen how ancient people used blood, architecture, precise economics, and tightly regulated fragrances to build a container for the divine. And it leaves us with a really fascinating thought about our own modern boundaries. In a world today where everything is completely accessible, mixable, and available for personal consumption, what do we protect with this level of reverence? Do we still have spaces, times, or experiences that we keep utterly separate and sacred? It's definitely something to think about.
Thanks for watching.
Stay blessed and don't forget to share this video with everyone.